pruning, they refer to the heading cuts, the way they make the heading cuts. You will still do the thinning as it is required. You will still do the selection of the branches. So you will thin out the complete removal of some of the branches that you want to remove. So after making the thinning cuts, after selecting the desired number of primary branches, then when it comes to heading those branches, either heading just a little or heading too much down to just leaving a small branch on the tree, then you define it as long, short, or intermediate. So in case of long pruning, you keep the long shoots and make no or very little heading cuts. In this case, you will definitely need tree tie, and we talked about tying the tree yesterday. So you will definitely need tree tie. This will likely have more fruit wood early on because you're maintaining a lot of structure on the tree. Short prune is really short prune, so you basically head back a lot of growth on the primary branches, and you only need a few inches of growth. Short prune is basically, it will encourage a lot of lateral growth. It will come into production later, but this is basically coming from the training experience that we have with peaches and other stone fruits. In case of almonds, most of the farmers, depending on their situation, now wind is one of the factors. Vigor of the variety, if you have too vigorous a variety, so if you want to actually trigger more growth, or if you want to let the tree grow on its natural shape, so you will make either of these two decisions. But most of the commercial California variety combinations, most of the California growers, they settle somewhere in between these two, and they call it intermediate pruning. So in case of long pruning, just to review, make no major heading cuts, keep long primary branches, and keep small lateral branches for providing leaves and early fruiting work. Okay, so this will be early. Keeps natural growth habit of the tree. The canopy grows to spreading, but it will need a rope, or it will need some time, or the limbs may break. The major benefit is you can have early bearing and heavy bearing, because you are actually maintaining the fruit wood on the tree. You're not cutting any fruit wood off. But it will take great skill and judgment, because you can have a really lanky tree to basically that could fall over or can be unmanageable. Short pruning is heading back the primary branches to maybe 1.5 feet to 2 feet, 46 to 61 centimeters. It's done in areas with strong winds. Because in case of strong winds, if you are leaving too long a growth, you can have the trees falling over. So in case of strong winds, you open up the canopy, you head the trees back to shorter limbs, and you can survive. But making strong heading cuts will stimulate vigorous secondary growth that we just learned as a response to the tree. Okay. So if you are making a lot of major heading cuts, then you would actually also need to come back in and make another pass to actually then select your branches, because you will have so many branches arising from lateral buds. So you will have to then come and remove some of them through thinning. Intermediate pruning, like I said, it's a compromise. The heading cuts are made basically 42 to 48 inches. Around 100 centimeters, a little over 100 centimeters from the trunk. And you just make the cuts just below the closely spaced buds in the last 6 to 7 inches of the shoot. So basically you remove the top feet of the shoot. So this will reduce the broom type lateral growth in the second year, and it will also give the fewer water sprouts. So if you have a vigorous variety, and you do the intermediate pruning, that may still require time or roping in the second year. Okay. Most deciduous trees, they are planted during the dormant season, bare-rooted trees, and then the trees are cut back at about 1 meter height when they are planted. Okay. And at the end of the first season's growth, the lateral branches can be selected as scaffolds appropriate to the training system. So these are the open center trees, basically cutting the head too low and then selecting the branches rising. This is an example of peach trees. For the peach trees, there were a couple of different training systems developed. This is to create a wide forum. This is what the open center ball shape looks from the top. So let's again have a review for the almonds. In the first year, the nursery trees, they are basically headed at 1 feet. And then the plants are staked sometimes, and then irrigated and planted. This is again the review. We select 4 to 5 permanent primary scaffold in the first dormant season. Then remove the other limbs and let the secondaries grow. In the second dormant season, the tree will have again several laterals, so you need to do a combination of thinning cuts, and then you would have the secondaries to actually have the tertiary growth. Once you come up with a desired shape during the year 1, year 2, and maybe year 3, then in California these days the university is recommending that for the mature trees you only have these few reasons to come in and prune, but usually they're just pruned for corrective pruning and not really doing any growth. So sometimes you would need to invigorate or renew the fruit wood if they're really old trees. So you have a lot of old wood that is out of production, then you need to cut that and prune the trees to rejuvenate, to bring out new fruit wood. If the trees are big and old and there's a lot of shading, so you need to open up the canopy or you need to reduce the shading to manage the light distribution, then you would need to prune. Reduce alternate bearings, not so much applicable in almonds, because we will talk about the spur dynamics and the fruit set and fruit growth in the next lecture. But if your trees are, still we have seen some old trees of non-pearl variety that can get into alternate bearing in the later years. So if you have the trees going into alternate bearing, meaning that you have one year with major fruit set and the next year is low, then you will need to adjust the tree's shape and architecture with some pruning. And the last one would be to control tree size. Now we didn't talk about summer pruning versus dormant pruning. Pruning normally is done during the winter season, during the dormant period, that is the normal pruning season. If you want to control the tree size, you can do summer pruning, because pruning in the summer can really make the tree grow less. So you can always do pruning to control the tree size. This is what the central leader trained trees will look like. This is from the side. The central leader has not been cut. And the natural lateral growth is preserved with some amount of thinning to select the branches. Again, the branch angle and the other concepts stay the same. This is what it looks from the top. The University of California researchers have done a recent study in walnuts. So they've compared, this is still early years of production, so we don't have a long-term yield data. But like I mentioned yesterday, that both the unheaded or the modified central leader, they had similar cumulative yield during the initial years, although when the trees were left unheaded at all, because we didn't cut off a lot of fruit wood in early years, so they were actually bearing from crop early on. but eventually they had similar yields. Okay, and then both of these treatments were significantly different in terms of the cost, because in case of unheaded trees, you save a lot of money on bringing in the pruning labor and having the pruning done. So that saves a lot of cost. They have not seen any disadvantages yet, but still a lot of long-term questions are remaining. We don't have the long-term data on the long-term effects. For example, what happens to the lateral growth, because now you're leaving the central leader unheaded and you're making very few cuts overall in the tree. Is the tree strong enough? Is the tree developing the strong branches? Are the branches getting firmed up or invigorated? Or is the tree too thin with a lot of thin branches? It's fine if the tree is making a lot of yield, but what happens in the long term? If the tree is 20 years old, it's still very thin and not very strong, that can be a negative. So we are still awaiting the long-term results from this trial. So in general, the guidelines for developing a central leader form is basically, you have the central leader, and you can actually, make it a modified central leader, but usually in the case of central leaders, you basically keep this central leader unpruned and then select the laterals by thinning. You space out the laterals from one another so that you don't have crisscrossing branches and too much shading. But at the same time, in case of central leader trees, you want to fill the canopy. You want to have fruit wood so that you are developing a framework. And then they're usually 2.5 meters high in the first couple of years. So this is what the central leader tree will look like, just like a Christmas tree, like a pyramid-shaped tree. So these are some of the considerations. For example, when you're making some heading cuts, you're selecting the laterals. You're making the heading cuts. You make sure you keep, just make a cut above a lateral branch, which is lateral bud, which is outward facing. So that's what will actually encourage the side growth. So this is what you made in year one. You made a cut here, just above this bud, which is going to grow into a lateral in the second year. This is the one. And then again, you make another cut above another similar bud that will actually break and make the third year growth, and so on. So we are still trying to develop the canopy upwards. One of the advantages of this shape of the tree that we are actually hoping to get on the trial that we have on campus is if you have a lot of growth up the tree and not so much spreading outwards, you can still have a decent amount of crop per tree. But you can actually plant the trees closer together. So you can have a lot more crop on a total per acre or per hectare basis by utilizing this space. And the second advantage would be that if this canopy is not spreading outwards too much, you can have a very good light distribution up and down the column. So that is what is the goal for the central leader trees that we are trying to develop. There are still a lot of people working on this, so we don't have a clear verdict on where this is going. So when to prune, like I already mentioned, for pruning to have the desired invigorating effect, should be done in the dormant season unless you want the stunted effect or the growth controlling effect. In that case, you would actually do summer pruning. This is an example of mechanical pruning. You're already familiar with that. So sometimes you need to head the trees for some reasons. We talked about yesterday. If you are heading it a lot, then sometimes you are creating more problems. So unless you really have a reason, You don't usually do that. But there is a sideways mechanical pruning. You may want to come in every other year, depending on how big the trees are getting and if they're getting into each other, if they're causing too much shading within the canopy. So then we just basically sideways hedge the canopies. These are basically, again, summarizing. So I have a few slides of these points, and this is basically a review of the points that we just discussed. So, I don't see a reason to, again, go through all these slides. This is pretty much what we just discussed. We have basically put up this 10 points. This is what I had for training and pruning. With that, I will take any questions, and then we will move on to the food set slide. Thank you. All right. Questions?
Hello. I was thinking, what if we don't go vertically, but we go horizontally? So we go up as high as possible, and then we try to spread the trees, let's say almond trees, to cover whole area. So not to have shade on the floor at all. Has anyone done trial with that, or it's not possible because you cannot go so up that you can harvest them with the harvester?
That's a really good question, and I can tell you that based on the experience and based on the okay. Right. I can say, based on my experience and learning from California, that we have basically already done that in a conventional low density spacing where you plant the trees 6 or 7 feet apart, even within the row. And I have on my computer in another presentation the data from that experiment. When you have a low density scenario and a vigorous variety on a vigorous rootstock, the trees tend to grow spreading. So they spread naturally because they have a lot of light coming from empty spaces around it. That creates a huge tree. No doubt that tree is going to bear good crop, but it's also going to create a lot of problems. For example, now the branches are going outwards and spreading and more flat in nature, so there is more limb breakage. And then limb breakage basically ends up creating a situation where you have lesser canopy light interception on a per acre basis in just into year like 12 or 13 and 15. So you lose a lot of wood, right? Also, I have seen that if you have the spreading huge trees with a lot of light around it, if the limbs don't break, they still create a lot of pressure because a single tree is bearing a lot of crop. So the limbs bend and they form the cracks at the union where they're attached to the trunk. And that crack, when it rains, the water ponds there, and that crack eventually develops some fungal infection. So you will need to remove that limb anyways, or it can get the infection down to the trunk and the whole tree falls over. Now another good reason to probably not go sideways is the shaking. The mechanics of the shaking, the shaker motion, it's basically based on simple principles of up and down the axis of the tree. So the more closer to the central axis the crop is, you will have more effective shaking motion and the transfer of that shaking to the nuts. So that would be a really important factor for shaking.
So they will fall much easier which are closer to it.
Yeah.
They will fall much easier which are closer to it.
Right. So if they're closer to the main trunk, your shaking motion from the shaker is transferred up and down and to the limbs in a more efficient way, and you will have more force transferred to the nuts to fall off.
Yeah, so we understand that there is many training techniques, but if we are trying to establish the orchard, which one should we decide or lean towards? Because I mean, we should consider the natural habit of the tree or variety, the way it grows, and try to match our training system to it, or there is some differences in the yield, or what should be the main reasons which makes you to decide which training system you want to use in your orchard, for example?
Yeah. So, like we were having discussion yesterday in response to one of the questions, and yesterday I mentioned on one of my slides that you can modify the tree's architecture to some extent by making the cuts, but you cannot change the genetics. So the response of the tree, or the vigor of the tree, and the architecture, the branch angle, and the apical dominance, they are all written in the genetic information of that particular variety. So the first important decision would be to match your variety and rootstock to the type of training system that you are actually planting to. Right? So if you are planting too close and have the central leader system in mind, you are going to select the material which is suited for high density or central leader, closer density and central leader, for example, upright varieties which have a strong central index that we saw yesterday. If you are trying to plant in a low density scenario, the conventional vigorous varieties, then you may want to fill that space with your vigorous variety. Then you will train the trees into spreading. So you will actually select the germplasm material based on that, and then try to, just like we was mentioning, try to make a spreading tree. So it really depends on the plant material that you planted. You match the plant material, and then you help the tree with training to help it grow best in that spacing and design.
I have a question. Okay, as I understood yesterday, you recommended somehow that short trees are better because the sun is distributed evenly, and when taking the harvest, we don't need twice maybe to get the harvest, and the costs are also decreased because of this, because we need to take harvest once, yes? And now, as I understood, from this central leading tree, as I understood, this is quite a tall tree, and how is the distribution of sun well done in this case, and how doesn't it make some sense when making harvest once or twice?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a really good question. Now, there's a little difference when I was describing the really short trees and ease of harvesting. That more likely applies to apples and peaches, where you're actually harvesting, in person. You're bringing in labor, and then if there's a tall tree, then you are going to use the ladders to get the fruit from the tree. So in that case, the short trees planted, very closely, they are desirable. In case of these, the light distribution is usually not an issue because you have a tall column which is not spreading too much. So the trees are really this much wide from the central column, and the light penetrates. So for what my hypothesis from this would be, like as I said, we don't have definitive data from this, but what I expect from these trees is that you will have good light interception inside the canopy, light penetration in the canopy, that you will have a uniform hull split and a uniform maturity up and down. So because we are actually harvesting the trees mechanically, so we don't have the issues with ladders or labors. So we can still maintain these trees in a high density scenario and then harvest them mechanically. But the ripening uniformity, the maturity would not.
So we should cut the branches in such a way that should control how the sun distributes. So this is the only issue we make, yes, in the central region.
Yeah. Yeah, so we still
not
select
shading each other.
Yeah, yeah, we still select some of the branches by thinning out some of the branches to open up the canopy. But then, I got these pictures from some UC recommendations website that they're just still making the cuts, heading cuts to actually grow the laterals sideways. So you still want to maintain some growth because that growth is going to produce the fruits eventually. But that growth will still be not as spreading as in a tree which is really trained to a spreading tree.
როცა საუბარია ანალიტიკურ ფორმირებაზე, მაგალითად გაშლილი რეფორმირების დროს ნერგების გადაჭრა რა სიმაღლეზე ხდება ერთწლოვანი ნერგების და რატომ სიტყვაზე საუკეთესო რა სიმაღლეზე
Do you mean the height of head in an open center?
ერთწლოვანი სცენარეზე სიმაღლის გადაჭრას.
Yes. On open center, the height of the first cut, on the first year.
Okay, so at the end of the first year, the height of the head is usually at 1 meter. When the trees come from the nursery and planted, they are usually headed at 1 meter height in case of almonds. And then you select, depending on your long pruning or intermediate pruning. In case of long pruning, you pretty much leave the primary branches and they grow like, I would say 3 to 4 feet, another 1 meter from the trunk. So at the end of the first year, you would have the tree like maybe a little under 2 meters if you are doing minimal pruning or long pruning. In case of intermediate or short pruning, then you will have the shorter height, maybe 1.5 meter. Does it answer your question?
So some people, there is a practice, some people cut on 1 meter and 10 centimeters, some of 90 centimeters, some. I want to.
Every agronomist is doing it differently. I mean, they're cutting the trunk on a different height. Some cuts on 1 meter, some on 90, some on 80, some 1 and 10. What should be the main idea to keep the height? Just to have enough clean room for the shaker, and that's it?
That's one of the major deciding factors in almonds. The height of the head to leave some room for the shaker.
Okay.
And cutting too low is usually a practice in plums and peaches because you want to actually start the lateral growth too low so that the tree is eventually very low.
Yeah, and
approachable. Yeah. But in case of almonds, you need to leave enough room.
For shaker, but
yeah.
What is this room? 80 centimeter, for example, to have the clean trunk? Or
from the lowest branch, in California, I would say
in inches, okay.
Yeah.
I'll transfer.
Right. So right around, because remember that trunk is also going to grow a little bit, but not that much as it will grow through the apical growth. So right around 30 centimeters, which would be 30 inches, which would be 70. 70. That's about the height.
76 centimeters.
Right. So I would say 70.
Okay, yeah.
About 70 centimeters.
For example, if you have clean 80 centimeter, you can on 1 meter you have around 20 centimeter for the scaffolds.
20 to 30,
yeah.
maybe 30 centimeters. for spacing out. So that's usually the case.
But this 10 centimeter doesn't really make big difference, am I right?
It does not. Yeah, it does not make a big difference.
So after we make the cut, this trunk still grows a bit, am I right?
When you make a cut, no, it will not make a significant growth, but then you will have enough room.
Okay, next question. Is there any research about secondary branches development in order their direction? For example, can we say that same rootstock, same variety gives us different different angle branches in this particular place, and the other place, other geographical place, lateral branches maybe gives us different corners. Sometimes it will be upright, and sometimes you mentioned that it depends on the variety, but if we discuss, if we say same variety, same rootstock, same soil, let's say.
Yeah, that's a good question. And based on my knowledge, I would say that the genetics of the variety and the rootstock would be a major determining factor in that. We have seen, for example, the Shasta variety makes a little more flatter angles than the other varieties. So that's more like a genetic determinant. I don't see any reason climate or soil will have much of an effect. The way you cut the primary scaffold, sometimes we have in one of the experiments that we have the pruning responses. We did some central leaders, and then we cut all the primaries to like 2 buds. So basically, we had we used a different term, like basically it's like leaving the stubs. So in the system that I described, we just leave the laterals or the primaries to grow for like 2 or 3 feet. But in that case, in that experiment, we actually cut all of them down to the stubs. Just left only 2. So that had an effect on the branch angle, because they were actually now sprouting the lateral buds and making other branches. So that actually gave a little bit different flatter angles. So again, that is a response to that kind of vigorous cut that you made. But if you're just letting them grow naturally, the genetics would be affected.
Hello?
Yeah.
You mentioned that the trunk is growing. So when we are planting the tree, it's a very important case. We have to have 1 meter or 80 centimeter clear stem without branches. And if it grows, we have to cut down because it will grow. So it's very important. It depends on the variety, or it is the one rule that it grows, for example, 5 centimeters or 2 centimeters. To my mind, I see that it doesn't grow. It doesn't grow because the first branch, the diameter is growing, and it doesn't we cannot see the effect that it grows.
No.
So we have to have the exact information according to this case in order to plan the first cut.
Right. Yeah. So, like I said, it does not grow significantly as. Okay. So, like I said, it does not grow significantly like in a growth, but it will. there will be cellular enlargement, anatomical enlargement at the cellular level. So that will not make a significant growth of the height. So where you cut, where you head it back, the tree is pretty much going to have around that height. So you cannot call it like significant growth in terms of increasing the height. Does it make sense? So you basically, you may want to leave enough space for your shaker in the beginning at the time that you're making the cut. Not expecting that the tree will make more room to fit in the shaker. Does it make sense?
We can say that it doesn't grow.
It doesn't grow. Yeah, we can say it does not grow. Yeah. So, like not growing in terms of growth.
ერთი კითხვა მაქვს შეიძლება. კითხავ. თუ სწორად გავიგე, ესე იგი პირველ წელს, მეორე წელს, მესამე წელს ხდება კვათხის ფორმირება. მაგალითად ჯამური გასულას ვაკეთებთ, ხო რა? აი მე შემდეგ წლებში მე-5 წელს, მე-6 წელს უნდა რაღაცა ხილისხმება და გასულა თუ უნდა გავუშვათ მცენარე და გაიზარდოს თავისით.
The usual
ანუ გაიზარდოს სულას ვაკეთებთ. ზაფხულის სულას ვაკეთებთ.
სვანებს სულა.
პატარა ტოტები, რომელიც შიგნით ჩახშერებულად ამოდის, ისინი უნდა შევაცადოთ, უნდა დავტოვოთ.
Okay, the usual practice in California is basically not to do any structural shaping or pruning after year 3, but you still need to take care of any crowding branches, crisscrossing branches, the branches that are interfering with other branches, and then some branches grow down.
ერთმანეთს თუ შლის ჩახშირება, მაგას ვაცნობ და ისე ხელისკლება არ უნდა ჩვეულებრივად ვიუშვოთ, ხო?
Can you repeat the question in English, please?
ანუ იმ ტოტებს ვაშორებთ, რომლებიც ერთმანეთს ხელს უშლის, თქვათ, ან ედება, ან ფარავს რაღაცას. სხვა შემთხვევაში ჩვეულებრივად ხელს არ ვახლებთ და ვაძლევთ თავისუფალი ზრდის საშუალებას.
Yes, that is right. So that is what the researchers in California are recommending these days. Let the tree grow on its own, unless you have the need to remove the dead branches or crisscrossing branches. So we call it corrective pruning. So that is minimal intervention.
One more and that's it. My question is there some techniques which helps, for example, trunk to thicken faster? For example, if we don't cut it very closer to the trunk branches which are coming from the, when we are choosing, for example, 3 to 5 scaffolds, others are we removed, but if we cut them below 80 centimeter branches and trim little bit, does it help to thicken trunk, or it's only we are doing to prevent plant from disease infection?
So, just so to clear, like if I understood the question correctly, are you saying that if we leave more branches?
No. I mean when we are thinning, so we are leaving little bit. We are not removing it very closer to a trunk. We leave just piece of the branch here. Am I right? So does this remaining helps trunk to get thicker, or it's only we are using to prevent plant from disease infection?
Yeah. So we are basically trying not to cut too close to the main trunk, so that it actually disrupts the phloem and the xylem, mostly the phloem on the trunk, and also the healing process basically takes the top few centimeters of that surface, right? So the tree has the response in terms of cut, that it heals itself. So you may want to leave that part of the branch sticking out from the trunk so that it could heal properly without interfering with the cellular layers of the main trunk. So that's the only reason that we are meaning. We are not we are keeping that stub. We are not keeping a long stub so as to have any bud on that would actually sprout.
Like how many millimeters?
What should be the size of the during the tuning when we are cutting it?
And it depends.
How should we determine the size? Depending on diameter?
Yeah, it really depends on the diameter. If you're talking about the first year tree, the branches are really thin. So I would say maybe 1.5 centimeters, and if you're removing a bigger branch, that will make it maybe an inch or more.
Thank you.
Yes.
There are some says that if you had cut a little bit more, you are stimulating the root system. And have you some information or some trials according to this case that if we plant the trees, we are stimulating the root system?
No, I'm not familiar with any work on that, but that's an interesting question.
That's right. What Tornik says, for example, when we are doing first time heading here, they are saying that it helps root system to become stronger. Is it true or not? When we do just this keeping plant on one day.
I don't remember any research evidence that I could share with you, but that is definitely something that I can explore. It's worth exploring. Yeah, maybe we can do here. Yeah, maybe we can compare the root systems with of headed and unheaded trees.
Kolbashi dał. Jak masz kolbashi? Jak to jest?